Have you ever had a moment when your world came to a complete stop? Not from grief, not from anger, but from a silence so deep it echoed with something you never expected to hear. Before I tell you what my son said, I want to ask, where are you reading this from? Which city? Tell me in the comments. I love seeing how so many of us are quietly connected by the strangest, most beautiful twists of life. Now let me take you back to the very beginning. The house had become painfully quiet since my husband George died. After 42 years of marriage, his absence was felt not just in the empty space beside me in bed. Spread through the kitchen, the garage, even the creaky hallway. Everywhere I looked, something reminded me of him. His toothbrush, the wool cardigan he always left draped over the dining room chair, and the half-finished crossword on the table on the porch. The days blurred together. I kept myself busy, as I suppose most widows do. Cleaning out drawers that didn't need it, folding fresh laundry, rearranging things in the pantry just to keep my hands occupied. But grief can't be organized. Just days. My son Michael had been so attentive all this time. He visited me every few days. Sometimes he brought groceries, sometimes just himself. He was 42, as strong as his father, with the same warm brown eyes and thoughtful silence. Since his divorce 2 years ago, he'd become more withdrawn, as if he was always analyzing the world instead of reacting to it. One Thursday afternoon, I had just come back from watering the flowers when I heard a key turn in the lock. I turned and instinctively smiled, my heart always a little lighter at the sight of him. "You're early," I said, drying my hands on a towel. He smiled, but there was something in his eyes. He hugged me gently, taking his time. He held on longer than usual. "I thought you could use some company today," he said quietly. I didn't ask why today or why at all. Truthfully, I did need company, but something told me he hadn't come just for that. We sat in the kitchen for a while, sipping coffee. A breeze blew in through the open window above the sink, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass. Outside, someone's dog barked lazily. Life seemed to go on even when I felt as if I'd been standing still for months. He leaned on the table, hands wrapped around his cup, knuckles tense. I knew that look. It was the same as when he was a boy working up the courage to ask me something, like when he broke the neighbor's window with a baseball or wanted to stay out past curfew. Waited. "Mom," he finally said, not looking at me. "Have you ever felt like you lost something more than just Dad?" The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" He hesitated. "I mean, did losing him make you feel like a part of yourself disappeared too?" My breath caught. I looked down at my hands, wrinkled, veined, and lately a little shaky. "Yes," I said. "That's exactly how I feel." There was a long pause. Michael stood, walked slowly to the window, then turned and leaned against the counter. "I think I lost part of myself with you too." I looked at him in confusion. He went on. "You were different with Dad around. Always on edge, always smiling but guarded. I could feel it. Even as a kid I wanted to be closer to you, but there was this wall, unseen but real." I blinked. My throat tightened. "Michael." He gently lifted his hand. "I'm not saying this to hurt you. I've just been thinking about it a lot since Dad's funeral. I feel like I see you, the real you, and I want to know that person. Not just as my mother, but as you." His words stunned and warmed me at the same time. I didn't know how to answer. He pulled a small wooden box from his coat pocket. I took it carefully. It was smooth and worn. Inside was a photograph I'd forgotten even existed. A black and white picture of me, probably around 20, laughing barefoot in the garden, wearing a straw hat in sunlight. I smiled, but at the same time felt a deep sadness. "I barely recognize her," I said, running my thumb over the image. "But I do," Michael replied. "And I want her back. I want you back, Mom." His voice trembled slightly. I looked up and saw his eyes were misty. I took his hand and he squeezed it tightly. There was something powerful in that silence between us. Decades of unspoken words, assumed roles, and unacknowledged longing for closeness. At last, he whispered what I never expected. "Can I ask you something personal?" I looked him in the eye, my heart beating a little faster. Of course. His voice was barely above a whisper. Is it okay if we talk about things we've never talked about before? Not as mother and son, just two people trying to make sense of the years we've lost. That's it. Not inappropriate, not awkward, but deeply honest. He wasn't asking for anything physical, nothing shameful. Just something deeper, something that broke the rigid mold of who we were supposed to be and offered a bridge between quietly drifting hearts. I nodded, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel so alone. The hours after Michael's visit lingered in my memory, like the scent of his aftershave in the hallway. Faint, but unforgettable. That evening, I sat on the porch, watching the sunset behind the neighbor's maple tree, my fingers still tracing the edges of that old photograph he had given me. The woman in it looked so carefree, so full of life. It was strange to think that she had once been me. That version of Margaret felt like a distant memory, almost a completely different person, someone I admired but couldn't quite remember how to be. Michael's words had struck a chord deeper than I wanted to admit. Not just because they came from him, but because they were something I'd longed to hear without even realizing it. Rarely did anyone ask how I was feeling, not just as a grieving widow, a mother, or a neighbor, but as a woman, a person with faded dreams and quiet thoughts. The next few days passed quietly. Michael didn't call, but I wasn't upset. Something told me he was giving me space to think, and I needed that. Then on Sunday afternoon I heard a familiar knock, 2 short raps and a pause, just like in childhood. I opened the door and there he stood, a bag of groceries in one hand and a 6-pack of root beer in the other. "I brought lunch," he said. His smile different this time, softer, less guarded. I let him in and we settled in the kitchen. I made sandwiches while he sliced apples, and soon we were sitting side by side, our knees almost touching under the table. "You seem lighter," he said after a few minutes of quiet eating. I laughed softly. "Maybe it's the mayonnaise." He grinned, then shook his head. "No, I mean it. You seem more like yourself." I lowered my eyes, brushing crumbs from my lap. "I've been thinking about what you said, about us." His gaze met mine and I sighed slowly. "You were right. I really did build a wall. Not just with you but with everyone. Your father was a good man, but there were parts of myself I had to keep silent around him. Not because he was cruel but because, well, sometimes marriage becomes more about peace than honesty. And maybe I got used to not being fully seen." Michael was silent, his expression unreadable, but there was a tenderness in his eyes I hadn't seen since he was a child. "I want to get to know both of us," I said. "Not just as mother and son, but as Michael, the man you've become." He blinked, clearly moved. A long silence fell between us, not awkward but meaningful. Then he gently reached across the table and touched my hand. His fingers were warm and familiar. "Did you ever wonder," he asked quietly, "what things might have been like if we'd grown up differently? If you hadn't had to be so distant?" I looked at him, not sure how to answer. "Yes," I finally said, "and it had happened more times than I could count." The air between us thickened, not with tension, not exactly, but with the anticipation of something new. We stood on unfamiliar ground, but neither of us seemed willing to step back. Later that evening, after the dishes were washed and the sun had begun to set, Michael suggested staying to watch a movie, something we hadn't done in years. We settled on the classic To Kill a Mockingbird and sat together on the couch. At first, we kept our distance, but over time, without thinking, I gently rested my head on his shoulder. He didn't flinch. He didn't pull away. Instead, he softly pressed his cheek against the top of my head. I could hear his heartbeat, steady, calm, and soothing. And then a thought crossed my mind, one I had never allowed myself before. I felt safe, not just physically but emotionally. That rare, deep safety that only comes when someone really sees you, truly sees you, and chooses to stay. When the movie ended, we sat in silence for a while. "I missed this," he said. "Me too," I whispered. He didn't leave right away. He stayed until the moon was high in the sky. When he finally got up to go, he turned to me at the door and looked into my eyes for what felt like a whole minute. Can I ask you something else? He said. He nodded. If I came by more often, not just to help around the house but just to be with you, would you mind? This time I didn't hesitate. I'd like that, I said warmly. And when he leaned in to kiss me on the cheek goodbye, his lips lingered a fraction longer than usual. There was no drama in it. There was nothing inappropriate. There was tenderness. When the door closed behind him, I stood in the hallway for a long time. Something between us had changed, and deep down, I knew it was only the beginning. On Saturday evening, just as the sun was setting and the sky turned a gentle orange and lavender, I heard a knock. The same rhythm, 2 short knocks, a pause. I opened the door and there he was. No backpack, no groceries. Just him. Hi, he said a little nervously. Can I come in? You don't have to ask. He smiled and something in his shoulders relaxed. I stepped aside and he entered as if it were his first time. I led him to the living room, the same room where we'd sat so many times. But today everything was different. There was something fragile yet electric in the air between us. We didn't sit apart. We sat close, our thighs touching on the couch, our shoulders brushing. He took my hand and I let him. His thumb traced slow circles on my skin. I've been thinking, he said quietly. About us. About what we're doing, what we're feeling. I nodded, my heart quietly pounding in my chest. Me too. It scares me, he admitted, because it's not something people will understand. I met his gaze. Do you understand? He was silent for a moment. I don't know, but I feel it. And it doesn't seem wrong. Feels like healing. That word struck a place inside me I hadn't even realized was still hurting. Healing. Yes, that's what it was. Not fantasy, not confusion. It was something gentle grown out of years of unspoken love from the cracks left by loss. It was born not of lust, but of a longing to be fully known deeply, without shame. I don't want you to feel uncomfortable, he said, gently squeezing my hand. If this ever crosses a line. You haven't, I answered quickly. You've been kinder to my heart than anyone in my life. He exhaled with the same quiet relief I'd seen in him as a child when the truth finally slipped out. That evening we talked for hours about life, regrets, the choices we never made but always wondered about. He told me he hadn't felt truly close to anyone since the divorce, that he hadn't even let anyone hold his hand for over a year. That sitting beside me felt safer than any relationship he'd known as an adult. And I told him things I'd never said aloud before. The pain of growing older and the loneliness of being seen only through the roles of wife, mother, widow, and never simply as Lisa. When the clock struck midnight, he stood up slowly. I have to go, he said, but I don't want to. I stood beside him. We faced each other. The room was dark and warm. You can stay, I said before I could think. Just sleep. Just be here. He looked at me trying to understand something. I'll stay on the couch, he offered as if testing the space. You don't have to, I answered quietly. We had already crossed the bridge. Now we were just walking slowly. I turned off the light and led him to my room. We didn't hurry. We didn't even undress. We lay in bed, fully clothed, facing each other in the soft darkness. Our fingers intertwined, our breathing merged. And in that bed there was no guilt, no taboo, only a mother and her grown son, rediscovering each other in a way neither of us had ever planned. Not with bodies but with open hearts. He kissed my forehead, then my cheek, and then very gently touched my lips. It was not a kiss of passion, it was gentle and everything felt so different. I don't know where this will lead us, but I don't want to lose this safe and beautiful feeling I have right now. Many may not understand, but I just want us to walk through this together, without any distractions or barriers. If you'd like to see more, don't forget to like, share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe to the channel.